This current full moon in Aquarius allows me to explain a more complex aspect pattern called Thor's hammer. I'm Sook Boy, you're awesome. Let's talk about it. Now, if you tap out at some point and you scroll on, the one thing I want you to take away from this is over this full moon, you could find yourself getting caught in the crossfire, at odds with two other entities, two other people's conflicts that you're involuntarily brought into and have to deal with, even though it's a their problem, not a you problem. I've already uploaded 12 videos explaining exactly how the Aquarius full moon impacts every single sign. Go for a scroll, it's directly under this one, just saying. Now, this square is the base of Thor's hammer, and the two competing bodies are Venus in Virgo, Mars in Gemini. You know, you've got your classic Mars-Venus situation here, which is basically them both showing up and conflicting or generating friction around resources, personal values, and relationship boundaries. They're both ruled by Mercury in Cancer, so there's the logistics around these situations, and because it's in Cancer, this is almost like an emotional attachment or emotional sensitivity that somehow might cloud a more objective approach. You know, Mercury in Cancer is going to be a lot more subjective about its attachments towards, you know, the relationship, personal values, resources allocated, and boundaries, let's say. Now, Thor's hammer is made up of three separate points. In this case, it's the Mars and Venus. I've already covered that. And also this Pluto. And this Pluto becomes the apex planet. The tension between Venus and Mars is projected upwards towards a 135-degree sesquiquadrate. So if I draw that in orange, it looks like that. Now, I've already covered it. That square is basically generating all the tension and the friction, and that energy is projected upwards via a 135-degree sesquiquadrant. Again, that's represented by those orange lines. These angles channel the compressed energy of the square into the single focus point, the apex. Now, the apex functions like a pressure valve, a lightning rod. Tension builds silently until it breaks open suddenly into some kind of forced event or course correction. The reason why this is important pertaining to the full moon in Aquarius is because Pluto is the apex planet. It's getting all that channeled tension, aggression, energy, conflict, etc. And that Pluto is actually conjunct the full moon in Aquarius, meaning that both the moon and Pluto are receiving all this discharged direct energy from Venus and Mars. In mundane astrology, the moon signifies the people, the populace, the cultural zeitgeist, let's say, especially when it's in Aquarius. Now, moon conjunct Pluto is difficult on its own, but when it's on the receiving end of Thor's hammer, it greatly increases the pressure, let's say. In other words, the populace, the people, stand on the receiving end of heavy institutional power dynamics and system shifts. The friction is built up by the base of that square, and it's funneled directly towards the collective moon in Aquarius. Now, that's a collective interpretation. On a more personal level, that could mean that there's two separate entities, some kind of circumstantial situation, two other people in your life perhaps, they're having conflict, but you are getting caught in the crossfire. Now, on top of that, we've got these two semi-squares hitting the Sun, Jupiter, cazimi. I know there's a lot of terminology here, just bear with me. Now, this Sun Leo is sitting in direct opposition to the Pluto moon. In other words, everything's locked in pretty tight, and so there's somewhat of a very sharp standoff, loud, top-down authority asserting itself on the Leo end, while the general public absorb the cold, real-world realities on the Aquarius end. In other words, while the Sun and Jupiter are in a cazimi, they are projecting outward appearance of authority, high-profile declarations of visible leadership. True leverage does not sit on that side of the opposition. Power resides in the apex planet, the Pluto at 4 degrees of Aquarius. It's actually sucking in the moon, which should say about 6 degrees of Aquarius. Again, in mundane astrology, the Pluto apex planet represents the underlying structural system that governs the society, global banking networks, digital and technological infrastructure, regulative bodies, and the resource supply chain. These are non-negotiable mechanisms that enforce compliance and dictate how the grid actually operates beneath the political rhetoric. Now, Moon Pluto is on the apex. It's receiving all this energy. In other words, the collective and on a personal level, You might not have anything to do with the conflict that is represented in that square between Venus and Mars, but you definitely have to deal with it. You're receiving the shrapnel. You're receiving the excess energy indirectly or directly, depending on your circumstances. Again, on a personal level, you are getting caught in the crossfire and you might not have any choice about it. Don't react to it. Absorb that tension and respond to it once you've processed that conflict and you know exactly what you want to do. In other words, don't be impulsive. Hope that helps. Okay, bye.